Hey folks, today we're going to take a look inside the 210. I'll tell you about its inhabitants and kind of give you an update on how it's doing. It's all coming up right after this. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec. I hope you're doing alright. It's been a crazy week here. As you might know, lower Tennessee was hit with some tornadoes. In fact, my mother-in-law's house was hit by a tornado. She's fine. Thankfully, and her house is mostly fine, although everything around her is completely devastated. Holly's actually down there right now, kind of helping her out, cleaning things up. Some crazy, crazy times we're living in right now, and I hope this video finds you well. Alright, so it hasn't been a long time since I've talked about the 210, and I haven't cleaned it up quite as much as I usually do. Like, I've just been maintaining it and keeping it, you know, in a decent shape and everything. I've got some anubias floating over here. Pretty much whenever I go to put a plant in this thing, my blue acara likes to, he will immediately just sit there and watch. And I swear to God, as soon as I turn around, he'll reach in there and plucks it right back out. I guess I'm going to have to tie something heavy to this anubias to get it to actually sink and go down, but I'm kind of running out of places to put it. I've started, I gave up doing like a really pretty kind of minimalist aquascape that I was kind of going for before. Now I'm going for jungle. I think I mentioned that in the last video, and in fact I think my next video is going to be the pluses and minuses of a jungle tank, and maybe we'll take a look at this one over here, which is completely jungled out. Very difficult to see. Like if I close it off here, there you go. Yeah, that's a 27-gallon marine land cube, so we'll be taking a look at that next week. So to help jungle out this tank, what I've done is I've planted a lot of crypts here at the bottom, especially along through here, and a few other plants that grow to sometimes annoying degree. I mean, they're quite pervasive. Crypts especially, they'll just pop up everywhere and they'll slowly take over an aquarium. You won't even see it coming. Just one day, suddenly you've got crypts all over the place. That's happened to me on a couple of tanks. I think it's starting to happen to me on the Megaflex over there. I've already got one that kind of popped up out of nowhere. But it's doing so good, and I hate to get rid of it. Like, I hate to take a plant that's like actively helping the environment out in there out, but I also don't want them everywhere. And the bigger they get, as soon as they get big enough, I'll send out a runner, and then pretty much there's another crypt coming up somewhere else in your tank. This sword plant has done extremely well. It's the only one that's done well out of all the swords in this tank. I planted probably 3 or 4 different sword plants, but this one here is so big. It's probably the biggest sword I've ever grown, and it really seems to be doing well. It's got some floating debris and stuff in there too. Now, as far as the inhabitants of the tank, I've got, of course, the boesemani rainbows. I think I'm only down to maybe 2 or 3 of the originals. It's starting to get hard to tell because the smaller ones have grown so much since I put them in here. But I think I'm down to maybe 3 of the original fish that I think I put 5 in originally, that I grew out in the 56-gallon upstairs and eventually brought down here. All the rest that are in here are their offspring that I raised over the course of about a year or so upstairs. And I brought them down here actually pretty recently. And then there's the one tiny one in here that just kind of appeared out of nowhere. I'm pretty sure he was in the back, behind the background here. There's some gaps. You can't see it now. If you go back to like the original video for this tank, if you want to see it without a background or with me putting the background in, you'll see that there are these big overflow columns on either side, and the background sort of wraps around those, and it makes a big gap in the back. Not a huge gap, but there's definitely a gap back there, and I think some babies probably made it, some of these guys made it in here, and then the babies escaped to the back through one of the many holes that I drilled in the background. And it grew up back there and then somehow made its way back this way. In fact, there he is now. Super tiny, beautifully colored little fish. Like, it's probably the best colors on a small rainbow that I've ever seen, like out of the ones I've raised. I've really got a lot of them now, and they provide most of the movement and stuff that I see in this tank. Another active and helpful member of this tank is the Siamese algae eaters, which I have 2. These both started off as babies in smaller tanks to kind of help me deal with some algae issue. They're particularly good at eating black beard algae. There's absolutely 0 black beard algae in here. Nothing, it seems, really eats the hair algae. Maybe a mono shrimp, but I'd be scared to put any in here. But I have no blackbeard algae in here. Hopefully that's at least partially because of the Siamese algae eaters and their efforts. But I see them swimming a lot too. They swim around with the rainbows and they all kind of swim together. It's pretty neat. I of course have the blue acara, which is right here. She's been a little mopey, I think, since her boyfriend died this Christmas. But she still seems pretty active. Like I said, anytime I'm planting plants, she's in there just waiting for me to get done so she can pull them out. It's funny, she'll have a very particular area that she tends to protect, and she doesn't like it when I plant anything back there. If I put a nubius back there, kind of jam it in some wood, she pulls it out and ends up floating within minutes. She's the only one that actively will tug on plants, but she only does it right after they're put in. She won't mess with stuff that's kind of already been established. I never see her pulling at this one. The male, when I had the male, I noticed he would pull at all the plants, like established or not, and it made it kind of tough to keep things planted. She goes after new stuff. Like anytime, like the other day when I was pulling stem plants out, I was planting some back there in this one particular area, and she hates it when I plant stuff. She'll actively go in and try to remove it when I plant stuff there. The Ancaras are probably the biggest cichlids I've ever owned, and I think having them, I've really grown to appreciate how much personality is in a large cichlid like that. I've noticed the same kind of personalities in the smaller ones. Like I keep a lot of dwarf cichlids like rams and checkerboards and stuff. I think the checkerboards have the least amount of personality, and the rams have a ton of personality. Like the most personality in a small fish I've seen. A lot of attitude in those rams. But the blue Ankara really, I mean, that's the kind of fish like you give it a name. Unfortunately, this one's named Doofus. But you can really see the personality shining through. And I think, by owning this one, I can really see how people get addicted to the larger cichlids and stuff. When I see stuff like king and queen cichlids and see them talking to their fish and telling them which one is their favorite and all that stuff, I mean, I really understand it. I mean, they're like swimming Labrador retrievers, I guess. I think with fish, it's hard to know. It's hard to know how much of that personality is tacked on by your own expectations and how much is kind of shown to you. I mean, there's kind of they have a limited amount of emoting in their expressions and stuff. But I've definitely grown to appreciate the big cichlids. Now, because they don't always jive with planted tanks, I probably won't get a lot of big cichlids. In fact, these are one of the very few that you can even keep in a planted tank at all. Maybe that's true. If it's not, please let me know. Like if you've got a good cichlid, like not a huge one, maybe a medium-sized cichlid, and you think they do really good in a planted tank, I'd be curious to know. I mean, I know discus are kept in planted tanks all the time, but I don't. My water's pretty hard. I'm not going to set up an RO machine. I've always avoided discus pretty much for that reason. Anyway, back to fish I already have. So in this tank, I have what's probably, forgive me if I'm wrong. This fish is at least 9 or 10 years old, maybe older. And it is the fattest, oldest yo-yo loach I've ever seen. I got this loach years and years ago specifically to eat snails, because I read somewhere that they eat snails and they're not as big as the clown loach. Like, the clown loach is famous for eating snails, but until I got this tank, I didn't have anything that would even be appropriate for a clown loach. They're another one that kind of destroys plants too, so I haven't gotten one since I got the big tank. But I got the yo-yo loach specifically for eating snails, and this tank has a tremendous amount of snails. I'm really glad to see he's doing well, because when I broke down, I used to have a 55 kind of across from where I'm sitting now. You might have to go in the way back in my videos to see that, like before I redid my floor and everything. But I had the loach in there, and when I moved him over to the cube that I just showed you a little while ago, he was very thin, and I was worried that it would that he was not going to survive long. So I guess he wasn't doing as very well in the other tank. He really thrived though. Once I put him into the cube with the jungle tank, he really thrived and started to pick up. I'm not sure why. I see him go after food a lot. I don't know if he's actually eating snails. I don't find like tons of dead snail shells everywhere, but I have to kind of assume he is. Either that or he's just eating a whole lot of the food, because he is now rotund. To the point where I wish I could probably put him on a diet, and probably should. He'd probably get fatty liver problems at this point. Getting him out of the cube was a nightmare. He was just too big for I mean, when you see him, he hasn't grown a whole lot since I put him. He's gotten wider, but he hasn't gotten much longer since I put him in here. But he was a very large fish for the 27-gallon. I mean, he was really, really big. And at that point, I had 2 plecos in there. He doesn't like plecos at all. The first thing that happened when I put him in here is he got into a battle with one of my plecos. In fact, they continue to be like this weird odd couple. What's funny is they lived together before. These two lived together in the 55 years ago. They're 2 of my oldest fish, and they are in a continuous battle. It doesn't matter where the territory is. I moved a territory from over here to back in the back. The pleco guards his cave, or her cave. I think it's a he. And just to antagonize the pleco, he'll sit there on top of it, or right there next to it. So I don't know if they're best friends or mortal enemies. It's hard to say. But they're 2 of my oldest fish, and I wanted them to live in like the best of my aquariums. And they're big enough to survive in here with the last fish that I'll talk about in a second. The yo-yo loach has gone so long, he's gotten his stripes back. Like when I first put him in here, I thought maybe he'd lost a lot of color. It might have been because of the chase. Like, what they do is, when they run from you, they'll duck under a plant and kind of go sideways and just kind of lay as close to the ground as they can. So you got to scoop up a bunch of gravel or something to try and get them. But I only went about 2 feet, from that tank to this tank, and I drained the 27-gallon down to about, like maybe 3 inches of water, so I could finally get in there and just get them, so they didn't have so many places to run. But I had to pull up a whole lot of plants to do it. I mean, it was a very difficult task to get him out of there. I'm so thankful I did, though, because he seems really happy running around in here, getting in arguments with the pleco, chasing the rainbows around and running all over the tank. They call them yo-yo loaches because usually the patterns on the side of them will write the word yo-yo. And his was never perfect, but it was a lot closer. Like you could kind of see it like a Y-O and something, and then another O. It didn't really look like yo-yo. But it's interesting to see, like, as he's gotten older, the patterns really changed into kind of this strange blotchy pattern to the point where it's not easily identifiable as a yo-yo loach. Oh, the other thing yo-yo loaches will do, hopefully I can get it on camera before I make this, is they'll lay on their side. They'll be perfectly fine, but they kind of lay on their side and almost play dead. They're just laying there like this, and then when you come up to kind of observe them, they'll flip over and like, ha-ha! I don't know why loaches do that. I think it's real unusual. But that's definitely what he is. Had them for a long, long time. I already started talking about my ancestral catfish, or my bristlenose catfish. One I thought was female. I think it might be a male, just like not a very well-developed male. It was my first bristlenose catfish. I brought it home. A long time ago, back in the same era. Maybe not quite as old as the yo-yo loach, but around the same time as the yo-yo loach, and it's actually lived in about probably 4 of my aquariums. I've had him. I've had he or her, either one. I've had it in the 55 down here. Had it in the 55 upstairs. Back when I had that dirted tank with the dirted 55. I had it, and then of course it's lived in here. It might have been in another tank at some point too. It's the easy, that one gets moved around a lot because she's been very predictable. Basically, you put a Pleco cave in there, it runs inside the Pleco cave, and then you can just pick up the whole cave and move it from one tank to another. So I never have to worry about getting the bristles caught in the net, or those things that come out on the sides. Got little spikes that'll come out on the sides of its gills and stuff. It's really neat. When it fights, they come out. Its main mission seems to just be like guard the cave at all costs. I don't know. I guess that must be an instinct thing, but that's what it does. Is it just guards that cave day and night. I see it out roaming around. Usually after the lights go off, I'll see it stuck to the side of the glass, kind of like making its way around. And sometimes if I lure them out with food, which I did for a lot of this video, when I lure them out with food, sometimes I'll get a good shot of it with the lights on. It's a little beat up. I had 2 bristlenose catfishes in here. I kind of thought this was female and the other one was male, but I think they were both male. They went at it, like they went into this like death spiral battle. It was the most violence I've had in this aquarium in a long time. Eventually I was able to like chase one into a cave, and I separated, took the younger one out of here. And then I started battling with the yo-yo loach, but it was not nearly as bad. The yo-yo loach can't hurt it quite as much. It's just real annoying, I guess, to it, and those two have been ignoring each other for a long, long time. So you'd think with this huge expanse of area that they would just, find their spots and get along, but it doesn't matter where I move that Pleco cave, and I've actually put other ones strategically all throughout this thing, all through the back. There's like 4 of them in here. It prefers this one in the corner back here, and of course the yo-yo loach is going to sit right on top of it. So the last fish to talk about in here is probably one of the more interesting ones. It's definitely a channel favorite, and it's Mr. Tubes. So we've been at home a lot lately because we're buckled down for the quarantine. And Kerrigan came to get me because I've been working upstairs. My laptop died, so I've been working upstairs on my old computer. And Kerrigan came to get me the other day and said, "Mr. Tubes is doing something crazy. Come down and look." So I came down, and I found that Tubes had a hold of his own tail. It was just kind of thrashing around and spinning around in a circle. I videotaped it a little bit, mainly just so I could get some help and figure out what happened. Apparently this is something you mainly see in babies. Sometimes maybe they get impacted. I actually reached out to Rachel about that, and she said she's only seen it with very, very young bichers. And that seemed to be what the internet said as well. Not entirely sure what happened. It just kind of happened that once. I think we noticed it 3 times that day. It happened in quick succession, probably within 10 minutes of the video you saw. It happened again, then maybe one more time 30 minutes later. I was absolutely beside myself, going out of my mind, trying to figure out what had happened. We've become very fond of Mr. Tubes. We don't see him a whole lot. He doesn't come out. He's not super social. He comes out in the evenings a lot. I can lure him out with food a little bit. Mostly we'll see him kind of hiding and looking at us out of from the plants. Every now and then it's really cool. He'll come out and just kind of lay across these logs and stuff. It literally looks like an extra piece of driftwood that just kind of landed in there. We'll see him kind of majestically swimming up for some air. They do breathe air from the surface. They'd have a combination of lungs, of like a lung or lungs and gill or something like that, but he'll come in and take air from the surface and then swim back down every couple of hours or so. There's a chance he's doing it a lot when I'm not looking, so I'm not sure how often he has to do that. So after the incident, I took a close look at the tail. His tail was a little beat up, and I've seen it like that before. I kind of thought maybe the Ancaras, like the big male Ancara that I had before, had been picking on him, and maybe that's what had happened with the tail. And now I'm not so sure. It could have been him doing this while I wasn't around. I mean, this happened probably 9 o'clock in the morning, so normally, like if I was working, I wouldn't have seen that, or even known it had happened. It's very secretive during the day. When it's bright like this, you hardly ever see him. In fact, the one light in the back yet hasn't even come on, so this isn't even as bright as it gets. But he tends to hide when there's any kind of amount of light on. The most I see him is when these lights get at their dimmest point, and I think he notices that that the lights are dimming down and they're about to go off. And that's usually about when I feed them. I try to feed them as close to that, to the later in the evening when the lights are about to go off and stuff. I want them to be on enough to where I can see and kind of observe everybody as they kind of come out and get some food. And hopefully get to see Mr. Tubes a little bit too, but I want there to be some stuff left over for him to hunt out after the lights go off. And in fact, sometimes late at night, I'll see him kind of roaming around the tank. Usually what I see is this big white belly making his way around the tank and stuff, either going up for air or just kind of swimming back and forth, because he'll get in the corner over here and just kind of swim in a circle, or it goes back and forth a whole lot. And I'll throw some extra food, some sinking pellets or something in there for him to go hunt down. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and I've been, every chance I get in there and kind of take a look at this tail, and it's gotten better and better and better. In fact, you can't even see damage on it now. So I think it's going to be okay. Maybe it's just kind of a fluke thing, let's hope. If you've got any input on what that could be, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. I'd really appreciate it. So now I've rambled on about all my fish and stuff. If you've got any questions about this tank, feel free to ask. Of course, there is a whole playlist from the creation of this tank and then every update. You can find that on my main page. If you look, I've got playlists on all my different types of tanks. You know, like the specs and the flex and all the different types of tanks. You can see a playlist specifically about them. I do that because sometimes I'll get new viewers that just aren't really familiar with my work, or maybe if this is your first video of mine and you want to know all about how I did everything in this tank, it's all there. It's all there already, and you can watch. And it's not too long. Okay, so the next video I'm going to do is on the 27-gallon cube. I'll kind of get these windows out of the, yeah. The 27-gallon cube. My tentative title, a working title that I'd like to do now is Jungle Tank, the pluses and minuses of jungle tanks. Because there's not really a lot to say. I mean, the tank's completely stable. It's another tank that I set up on YouTube. I think I set up live on YouTube a long time ago. It's completely empty, pretty much, like, compared to the way it is now. It was just about empty when I set it up. And now it's absolutely full of plants. It is so full of plants. It's basically and tanks like that end up being sort of the farm for the new tanks that I set up. So I grow out plants, little pieces and segments of other plants that I find in other tanks. Like if I find a nice bit of Anubis floating around and I want to put it in a good place so it's nice and healthy, I'll stick it in a tank like that or a tank like the Spec and kind of grow them out in there. Big shout out to my Patreon subscribers. Love you guys, really appreciate your help. Also, there are a lot of one-time donations that came out of the last video. There's a link for that in the description. Oh my God, thank you guys. That's extremely generous. I really appreciate it. That's all I got for you right now. Until we meet again, follow your bliss, keep a clean tank, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Hey YouTube, this is Pecktec, and some other plants that I've known to grow almost to the point of being like annoyingly another active and helpful.